Well, Minnesota has a reputation as a progressive northern state, but back in the 30s, racism and discrimination weren't just confined to the South.
In tonight's Voices for Change, Maury Glover reveals what happened when a black family crossed the imaginary color line to live in a white neighborhood in Minneapolis, and how their former home has left a lasting legacy, both good and bad.
It was horrific, to be truthful about it. I never realized something like that happened.
At the corner of 46th and Columbus in South Minneapolis sits a small two-bedroom bungalow. But the home's simple exterior is at odds with its complex history.
He just wanted a nice home for his family. This was it.
For years, Robert Foreman never knew what happened to his grandparents here nearly 90 years ago. Even now, he has mixed emotions about one of the darkest chapters in the city's history finally coming to light.
Happy, sad, happy for the fact that they received some acknowledgement for what they did, even though they didn't realize what that was at the time. Sad because they were not here to receive those accolades themselves.
Arthur and Edith Lee bought the home in the then all-white Field neighborhood in 1931 and moved in with their daughter, Mary, when she was 6 years old. But their new neighbors soon found out a black family was living in their midst and took to the streets to show their displeasure.
They consulted with NAACP and they had decided, well, some teenagers might harass them, but they thought it would be okay. They moved in, and within a week, the white neighbors organized and started demonstrating outside of the house, gathering outside of this little two-bedroom house that they bought.
For days, crowds demonstrated in front of the Lee's house, hurling rocks, paint, and racial slurs in hopes of getting them to leave. One night, an angry mob of 4,000 people showed up, complete with vendors selling ice cream and popcorn, like it was a county fair.
Mary Lee, who told me this story, said she didn't really get why her mother was so terrified until she got up one morning and learned that her dog had been poisoned. They would say things like, burn them out, lynch them, and the police would come by, but they didn't try and control the mobs at all.
City leaders tried to negotiate a settlement where the Field Neighborhood Association would buy the house for $300 more than the Lees paid for it. But Lena Olive Smith, the first black woman to pass the bar in Minnesota and head of the Minneapolis NAACP, convinced the Lees to stand their ground and threatened to ask the governor to call in the National Guard.
I think she saw the lay of the land for black folks in Minneapolis, in the Twin Cities, when they wanted to own a home. There's a lot of cheating, lying, redlining, though redlining hadn't developed quite thoroughly in 1931. And she knew that appeasement didn't work. She had seen it not work.
After the Lees made it clear they were staying put, the crowd started thinning out and eventually disappeared. The family moved to another neighborhood in South Minneapolis a couple of years later, after feeling they'd stayed long enough to make their point.
Mary Lee told me that most of her parents' friends totally disagreed with what they were doing, the black family, the Lee family, because they didn't want to cause attention or a ruckus. They didn't want to call attention to themselves. Lena Smith wasn't afraid of calling attention to injustice.
Yeah, that's the crowd that gathered.
Even though the racial riots, as the newspapers called them, showed the worst of human behavior, Foreman says they are also an example of the best. His grandfather was a World War I veteran and a postal worker, and at the height of the unrest, his white co-workers and vets from the American Legion came to his aid, standing guard with guns at the house all night to keep the Lee family safe.
There's good and bad people in every race, and they will show up. And the good showed up, the bad were already here. But the good showed up and saved the day. They literally saved the day.
A plaque and sculpture now sit in the front yard to commemorate one of the worst racially motivated protests ever in the state. The house is also on the National Register of Historic Places because, as Foreman says, if we don't know our past, we can't create a better future.
It's a beautiful story to me. It has twists and turns, but what came together here for those 3 days where white people came together to help black people. It's a beautiful thing.
For Voices for Change, Maury Glover, Fox 9 News.